Good evening. I know the mic isn't that loud. Hello, good evening. I always thought my voice was loud enough. Good evening, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Ulrike Eder. I'm Chief Marketing Officer at eSynergy. And I had eye surgery last week, so my vision is slightly impaired, but I still can see there's many of you here, so thanks a lot for coming. And this is great for us. So this, the Tech Series is one of our flagship events. We run them twice a quarter on topics and themes we hear in the field, and we bring it to you, our community, with our esteemed panels. I like to think of the Tech Series as a bit of a Swiss Army knife. So it has a lot of tricks, and whether you're looking for your next challenge, whether you're looking for a partner to support you in boosting and accelerating your project, whether you want to network, learn more about the topic, hopefully there's a lot of value in one event for everyone. So thanks again for coming and making these valuable for each other. You know that I have to tell you a little bit about eSynergy as well. So I'll do that now and in a concise fashion. So we have two technology practices that we operate across, which are data, and we look at everything from ingestion to analytics and back, and platforms. And we underpin that with the ways of working practice as well. We find ourselves, as many other consultancies, in a very busy, saturated consulting landscape, as most of you would know and probably sympathize with. And the way we're trying to differentiate really is by one, doing the basics really, really well. On time, to scope, to budget, really delightful experience for our clients and for our community. And then we layer that. We layer that with really driving business value against our clients' business objectives. We layer that with small, highly experienced teams, some of the best in the market that you can find. We layer that with a metrics-driven environment, and we layer that with accelerators and patterns to really automate and speed up getting projects off the ground and over the finish line. That was about eSynergy. Some bits of housekeeping. The way we run these is we have our lovely Fionn kick us off from Goldman Sachs, and we follow that by a panel discussion, which is hosted by our head of data, Sunny. We follow that with some Q&A, so keep your questions ready, and we try and finish that by around 6:30, at which point you'll hear from me again. This event is recorded. If anybody would like to not be recorded, I don't know if we can do that, but maybe move to the back of the room. But yeah, thanks again for coming, and you'll hear from me later. Fionn.
Thank you. It's good to be with you. I'll quickly introduce myself. So I'm Fionn Ackland. I've been at Goldman Sachs coming on for 14 years. I actually started in the business side, so I actually supported our credit derivatives trading desks, if that means anything to any people here. So I did that for 6 years, and really learnt how the business works, what they care about, what does it mean for us to actually service our clients, what does client excellence look like. And then on the other side, also got to learn how difficult and sometimes painful dealing with the data was, or not having the right data in the right place in order to be able to deliver everything. And so about 7 years ago, I moved into a new role that we actually created at the firm, which was data models and governance, and I'm still there today. And what I really like is that I've been able to bring the business angle into data. I think traditionally a lot of our data engineering part of the firm are engineers, and actually what my team do is bring sort of that business angle alongside the data engineers, specifically to support the business. So we still very much support the business there as well. So when I was asked to speak this evening, I think there was a little bit of a prompt around how has data governance helped drive innovation? And I was like, that's a very good question. How has it helped drive innovation? So then I actually looked at the title of our team, and I was like, the journey our firm has been on is entirely encapsulated in that: data models and governance. So I thought what I'd do actually is give you a quick run through of sort of our journey as a firm, a bit about our platform, and how we've actually joined governance and data models together. So what I think is actually bring the best of data governance as a whole to the firm. So it was about 10 years ago, our data platform started being developed. So that's Alloy internally. If anyone's familiar with Legend externally through Finos, which is the Financial Open Source Foundation, they are the same thing. So Goldman Sachs open sourced Alloy, and it took on the name of Legend. So if I interchange between the two, that's probably why, but I'll try and stick with Alloy because that's our internal version. So it was about 10 years ago that was being developed, initially to allow the teams across the firm to be able to connect to our data, to be able to build data models, map between models, and also relationally map into databases. So that was sort of where it started. Parallel to that, on the other side, there was the team looking at governance and how do we make sure we start to bring data governance into the firm. And so also under the same platform name, they were building the idea of having data lineage, data contracts, and all of that good stuff that people here, I'm sure, are familiar with and deal with. And so they were separate, disjointed for a period of time. And so data models, for me, actually do bring data governance anyway, and I've spoken quite a bit about that and how we tie it with our platform, but sort of the completeness of data can be driven from within your model, whether you're building enumerations to make sure that the data points you're coming down are the ones you want. From a completeness perspective, making sure that you've got data types and constraints. From an accuracy perspective, and then also timeliness, really just helping people to connect to data in the best way. So we have a data engineering team that look after our enterprise models, and all of the associations and inheritance of those models is very clearly visible through our platform. So when people go in and want to connect to it, it's really quick and easy. So from a timeliness of sort of onboarding or set to market, that's nice and easy. And then obviously out of that, you can also build all your SLAs and sort of manage that timeliness as well. So from a models perspective, my mind actually was very much over there. From a governance angle, I was always sort of speaking that. And then over the last few years, lots of different conferences and discussions you go to, I think lots of people have been focused on, oh, you need your lineage and you need your contracts, which absolutely I agree. But I personally am not necessarily sure that being able to say you've ticked a box and said you've got a data contract has actually done much. It obviously allows you to say where it's come from. It makes sure you know you've got your SLA with your producers for sure. But I'm not sure you can necessarily say you've got better data because of that. And so more recently, as a firm, and like I say, we started this 10 years ago as a platform as a whole, so really only more recently are we actually helping to drive best practice in data for the firm by encouraging people as they do their modeling, as they connect to their data through the platform, they get the lineage and contracts for free. It's obviously not quite for free, but the engineering teams behind have sort of managed to build that out, and obviously the contract still has to be agreed. There's still work to do there. But actually, what we do is we go out to the teams and we say, look, go and use this platform, connect to our data in the ways that we're telling you to, and you will then be able to also comply with the policies that are out there and make sure that you've got your contract. So for me, really tying those two things together of data models and perhaps traditional data governance that people might think about, for me, has really brought those two together at the firm and made sure that we're getting that full set of governance, as I would think about it, from a data quality angle, but also for the traditional data governance that you also have to cover. And I think the other one for me that I think about when we come to data governance, and there's many more for sure. But the other one for me is sort of around data security. I think that one is clearly important to all of us as individuals as well. I don't think we could go about our day without thinking about how our own data is being used, whether that's on banking apps or anything else that you sign up for. And so the thing with our platform as well is just because you've connected to a data set, it doesn't mean it's going to pull back data for you. You have to also have your permissioning. So it's not just sort of this place where you can go and build and connect and think, woohoo, I can get access to everything. Actually, there's all the permissioning around that as well to make sure that the data security is there. So that, to me, I think are the three that I think about when data governance is spoken about, and for sure there's others out there. But that's sort of the journey we've been on as a firm in trying to sort of drive best practice. And so this platform now is used across the firm. It's used by our revenue sort of supporting divisions, but also for other places. So it's used by our HCM, which is HR in other places, for all of our people data. It's used in all of our market data, and obviously all of our transactional data as well for the bank. So it's really where we're pushing everyone to make sure that we're sort of on the same platform and getting the benefits of all of that. And so in terms of sort of how we then bring that back to the business, because I think that's most important for us. At the end of the day, we are there supporting the bank, supporting the trading and sales desks. And so more recently, what we've seen is some of the data lineage side of things actually has allowed us to track that all the way back up to booking systems. I think that's probably slightly new. I'm not sure. It'd be interesting to hear what other people have been doing. But I think we've had data in our enterprise models as such for a very long time, but perhaps that visibility of where it came from hasn't been quite so easy. So now we actually are able to document that and get that, which is really super helpful. So it means we can actually go back to the producers all the way back to the top and say to them, look, the impact of you doing this is this down the bottom, and we've sort of got that front to back. So the more recent scenario, for those of you who are in finance and familiar with the EMIR go live that happened yesterday, that just sort of, for us, was a front-to-back implementation from this sort of top all the way down lineage through the platform. And so a wonderful way to sort of demonstrate it and just show the business that, look, we've done this. It's the best way for us to actually get your data and make sure we're sending quality data out to the regulators, which is ultimately what they also care about as well, to keep the business compliant. I'll leave it there and hand over to our panel. Sunny, I'll hand over to... Great, and I'm sure they'll continue the conversation.
Thank you, Fionn. That was great, by the way. I must say, EMEA go live, quite a massive milestone, and congratulations on that. With that, I'd like to invite our amazing panel to join me here, and we can talk through these 300 questions that I've got listed down. Oh, sorry. Okay, maybe not. Okay. Please. As you can tell, my chair has been intentionally put on this side so that I can see what they're saying. All right? Yeah. A bit of... I was thinking, how do I start this, right, today? And do you know what? The most interesting bit about having a bunch of practitioners in the room is if all of them come from the same sort of view, then that's quite a little bit too biased, right? What we've got is an amazing panel with people from various experiences and also from public services to give us a fully rounded view on how data governance is being handled across the state, right? So with that, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself. I'm Sunny, as you know.
Thank you very much. That's working well, hopefully. Yes. Hi, everyone. I am Rebecca Gallagher. I am Data and AI Governance for Weir, which is the short answer. Sometimes it's a mining company. It's not actually a mining company. It's a company that provides technology services for mining companies all over the world. It's 150 years old. It was the Weir brothers who actually started it with Weir pumps. It's very engineering minded. So yeah, it's very interesting company to be in because they also merge and acquire with a lot of other technology companies. And it is very data-driven, as you can imagine. So there's lots of work to do in the world of data and governance, and AI as well now. So yeah, it keeps us very busy. And there's a mixture of kind of working backwards towards, back of what we already acquired and what we have in place, and creating that governance around what exists, and also the ongoing acquisitions of new technology. So there's a big variety there.
Hi everyone, my name's Neil McIver. I'm the Chief Data Officer at the Department for Education. So I've been there about 7 years. Before I went there, I'm the first CDO for the Department for Education. There was no data function at DFE, surprisingly enough. I've been a civil servant for 23 years now as well. I know you say, oh, gosh, you don't look old enough, but clearly I am. My responsibilities include, so it was quite nice without a data function there going in, so I could actually create the data function. So what I did is I actually created my directorate, which has got data architecture and modelling teams, that has a data governance function in there. I've got data engineering teams, data operation teams, but I've also managed to acquire over the years the data protection function and the knowledge information management teams. I'm responsible for the department's data ethics, in particular ethics in AI, and I'm also the senior information risk owner for the DFE, hence all the grey hairs.
Hi. Lynn Watts. Similarly, I have had a long career, 30 years, always in data. So I started doing a degree in what was sort of information systems, started my first job doing data modelling, ETL programming as it was then, sort of, helping people to build third normal form data models, loads of ETL jobs trying to conform this stuff and then opening it up for people to access. And then I think just throughout my career sort of got more into the governance side. So about 2015, I was at Lloyds, and then the Chief Data Office emerged. And so I applied to be Head of Data Governance, and a bit like you, I created it from scratch, the data governance function within that team. And then I moved to Legal & General after a good stint at Lloyds, having done BCBS 239 and sort of established their data governance function there. But moved to Legal & General Investment Management, again, started a data governance function. It's like you're having to start it because these that don't exist. And I've been at Royal London Asset Management now for 3 years, again, starting the data governance function, putting in place things that now I did before and thought, no, I don't like that. I'm going to do it this way this time. So, improve upon things you've learned upon. And we have an Azure data platform running Snowflake. Data shares have been an awesome technology, implementation that we're really leveraging. And we're now at the point where we are trying to ingest as much data as we can to build really good data products. That's where I am.
Hi, my name's Alex Kontofrios. I'm from Close Brothers. Close Brothers is a primarily UK-focused bank with 3 divisions. We have a bank which is split into commercial, retail, our volume business in retail, and commercial for things like invoice financing, property. We also have Winterflood, the brokerage, which some of you might know from up the road, and a asset management division. So I came in to Close Brothers around about the time I think Lynn went to Royal London, and we didn't have much data governance. In fact, I had to persuade people that I should have arrived in the first place. That was task number one, which was a bit of a shock, if I'm honest. So the reason I talk a little bit about the structure of Close Brothers is it's what some people might call federated, but it's very line of business oriented. And so, if you feel like things like data governance is hard because everyone's got different stories to tell inside the business, I feel your pain when we can maybe form a support group later. But it's critical to my way of thinking about data governance that a top-down cascade, apply the broad spectrum antibiotic to the firm through a policy just doesn't work. So I'm happy to explore that a bit further.
That's brilliant. So this is great because the experiences that we've got here are quite varied and obviously, but also similar in the fact that governance, everywhere you go, you got to start again, right? So that keeps some of us in business, so that's a good idea. Yeah. Having said that, right, one of the interesting things about the talk we heard from Fionn, right, I want to just dwell on that a little bit. So since you've got the mic, Alex, perhaps you can just sort of talk to us about your experience in going through the pains of this within Close Brothers and what you've actually seen or other organizations you worked at.
Sure. So actually, prior to working at Close Brothers, I worked for a private equity firm where basically if you said we need a policy, they'd say okay, and then next week there was a policy. And if you said, I think that we should be documenting these data elements thus, because they're kind of important, they said, okay, let's do that. And they kind of did that because it was PE and you just do as you're told and that's how it happens. Not generally with a smile on your face, but that's generally how that happens. Close Brothers is very different. We were talking earlier about the challenge of just not being able to cascade a policy. And really those are arbitrary things that might not actually help you. They might actually slow you down. So one of the things that we did early doors was try and partner up with projects to really embed the controls around data for things like regulatory reporting, and then working with specific projects on milestones to reduce the data risk in general, do like a data readiness set of milestones. So then when you want to get a data readiness standard, you can fend off any kind of, oh, it'll never work, by saying, well, behold, it is already. Your projects actually are working as such, so guess what? Why don't we do that? Getting them then to conform to those projects, to that standard in future is a different kettle of fish, but at least you've established the precedent. So it was very much a sort of bottom-up approach that I think kind of, if we've done anything successful, it's because we've actually done it as opposed to declared it.
I mean, Lynn, what's your experience?
I'm very similar, very honestly very similar. So at Lloyds, when I was at Lloyds Banking Group for a long time, we went policy, and because nobody really understood what data governance was, including myself, right, is the discipline was evolving as we were talking, you know, and trying to develop it. People were very scared of policy, and I spent nearly all of my time trying to justify why we were doing something instead of just doing it. You know, hours spent, what is this data? Is it critical? Is it not critical? Instead of just saying, let's just manage this data. Let's just look at it and go, yes, that needs a bit of a control on it. Yes, who's managing that from point A to point B? Because these things are happening. They are. Somebody is doing it. And you just have to find the people that are doing it and care about it enough. So I think, you know, you're right, and I wouldn't put another policy in, not unless I can help it. Unless they're dictated onto me, I will probably do it. That's not to say I'm not applying principles around what should be done in a policy. So if somebody came to me and said, have you got a data owner? Yes, I have. I just haven't ticked a box to tell you I've got one. And are you doing lineage? Yes, we are. And I think that's different to maybe 10 years ago, because we were trying to do lineage, but the tools weren't very good. I think what's changed now is we've got better tooling, so we can connect to databases and pull in the metadata, and then we know what's in the database and we can start to govern it, versus constantly trying to understand where the ecosystem and where the data is. So what was the question? Have I answered it enough?
You're okay. We've got it. So this is quite interesting. The reason, because I quite like the sort of synergy here, right? In terms of my experience with building out these platforms at a big global asset service, her name starts with a H, but I didn't say who it is, was exactly in that space that you have to pivot off the back of BAU sort of or ongoing projects and kind of use that as a launch pad to get these embedded in, right?
I agree. I think there's three things. There's BAU, make sure people are doing the things responsibly in BAU. Get it into the risk framework, because that is already well established, and you can broadly put in some data risks and then leverage the whole, you know, control owner type framework, which I've done in a couple of places. And then the change framework. You're absolutely right. You have to get this stuff into change, because nobody's wants to own something that isn't well designed in the first place. You say, oh, can you manage this data? By the way, it's shit. Nobody's going to do that. If you've got, you know, can you manage this data? It's just been implemented in an awesomely gold standard way by this project, they're more likely to take it on. So yeah, get into the existing frameworks as well as thinking about do you need your own, or do you need something that's, you know, over and above it, which is going to be hard to get the processes in.
Absolutely. I mean, you go back to Alex's point around getting this ground up, right? It's quite important because you start getting the buy-in, right? And you've got these poster child teams, which you can basically say, well, they're doing it, right? Surely it's possible, right? So I quite like that. And it's a similar analogy that you can apply to building out data ecosystem, data products. It's the same sort of thought process that goes
It
through
totally
it.
is, or embarrass people. Really? Nobody's managing that? What would audit say? You know, you've got these types of things, you know, because when you hold people to account, they're like, oh, yeah. So I think that's, you know, people are doing it. You just have to find them and try and explain it in a way that maybe is a slightly different spin on it, like the risk or the control or design from projects.
Yeah, and you make a lot of friends along the way, but that's just the way it is. So Neil, I mean, what's your sort of view in the public services space? I mean, the reason I ask also is because obviously from the FS or the more private sector world, it's all about commercial value, right? Whereas on the public services space, it's about citizen, it's about people value really. What exactly are we attributing to that?
So I think the biggest challenge in the public sector is to try and get our political lords and masters to actually understand the business case for data governance, when all they want to do is drive political policy deliveries really quickly. And indeed, I was in a conversation today where you know, it started out a really good conversation. Some of our policy colleagues saying we want an integrated data system of X, Y, and Z. I won't go into the detail of what it is. And then I said, yeah, that's really good. Let's think about how we model and architect this. And they went, oh, won't that just get in the way of delivery? Can't you just build a power app? And then as I wiped the tear away from my eye, I was just thinking, this is the repeated conversations that I have across government. And Rosalind from Cleaver and I were at, I won't say which one, but a government department recently where we were trying to persuade the board to invest in data management and data governance as a business proposition. And the analogy I tend to use on this one tends to be, imagine that data is the cosmos, okay? And data governance is the gravity that just holds everything together. Without gravity, all your planets are going to shoot off into space, stars are going to implode, and the whole universe as we know it will cease to exist. And that's what data governance is to our organisational systems, isn't it? Without data governance, our organisations will implode, we'll have loads of duplication, we'll have loads of inefficiencies. But most importantly as well, as we're building inefficiencies and duplications, we're going to be increasing our carbon footprint as well. And we need to make sure that we not only manage taxpayers' money, but we actually manage our impact on the environment as well. And so that's how important data governance is. Let's try and stop government imploding as we know it.
So if I was to summarize that a little bit, it's I'm going to try, right? The good thing is that the problems are the same, right? Obviously, you're looking at a world-ending scenario here, which kind of makes sense, right? Because you're trying to govern the government, yeah, effectively. What got me out of all of that is that I was thinking about this the other day when we had a little bit of a briefing about what is it going to be about today, right? And we were thinking, how many times is the word policy going to be mentioned, right? And I think we are past 10 already, right? And the reason is because it's kind of, we almost do not want to indulge in that, right? But we have to have a measured approach towards it, but also very, very practical, right? Just get on with it. What we don't want is, and I've seen this in my personal experience as well, is that sometimes these sort of high-profile activities or, I don't know, some sort of a macroeconomic event comes along and all the policies and all the governance like, no, this is too important. Let's ignore all of that. We'll catch up later. Retrospectively, governance just cannot be brought into place, right? And that's kind of what we are saying, really. So this is great, right? Rebecca, I'm going to give you a slightly different one on this, right? Because I think we are kind of, we're going to take a different spin on this, right? We've talked about governance, we talked about ground up and so on and so forth, right? With the sort of direction in the industry, a lot of talk around data products, right? There's been a topic that has been quite close to my heart. We've been talking about federated governance, right? Now, this is literally saying, well, no more central governance, right? And people interpret that as great, so we can decide what to govern, right? And that's not what this is about. So what's your take on that?
So I've always worked for very big companies. At the moment, the company I work for, Weir, has got 12,000 employees globally. And as I said before, a lot of technology and a lot of data. and growing in its maturity of governance, let's say. So there's a lot of work to do in the world of governance, and it's a hub and spoke model. And what I'm finding is the different business areas, so in mining, for example, we have minerals. Minerals is a huge division. It's what creates about 70% of revenue in Weir, so it's very important. Then we have ESCO, and we have all different business areas. And I'm finding that the hub and spoke model works well as long as there is a data governance and data management expert at the different business units that can work with us in the hub in order to develop, I'm not going to say policy, processes and standards and technology with them and not for them. So, and I've seen that, time and time again as well, and I've seen it go wrong a lot of the time, where it has been centralized and built for them, and when you go to deploy it, it's not fit for purpose. So what we're finding at the moment is those business units that are investing, so the spokes that are investing in data governance experts and data management experts who can work with the central hub, is working very well. It's a slow process, you can't boil the ocean, but we are, as you guys have said as well, we're focusing on those business value use cases and really driving our data governance initiatives on business value. Once we start to talk about AI, not that I'm going to shadow governance with the AI conversation, but once AI comes in, that's a little bit more of a different conversation because of the regulations around it. But with data governance initiatives, with those different business areas, business value focus completely, because our data doesn't really have a lot of sensitive data. It's not like the financial industry. A lot of it is risk, because of the risks involved in working in a mine and the calculations that are done in the mine, that you need to have, your data needs to be correct, otherwise things could go wrong, and also our sustainability reporting. So it's a different spin as well on what our priorities are.
I mean, the model still stands, right? And I think that's the important point, that across the industries that we are seeing here, right? Ultimately, the federated aspect of governance is important. What we don't want is the sort of teams individually going gangbusters and saying, you know what, we'll do this another day, or I don't think this is important enough to be governed because I have a critical deadline to be met, right? So that's quite interesting. I mean, Neil, what are you seeing in this space? I mean,
so I mean, this brings back to that gravitational pull, doesn't it? I'm totally ambivalent about whether we have federated or centralised models. I think depending on the landscape of your organisation, some work in some organisations, others work in others. But the important common element is that central, and it could be a very small central pull, but it's that gravitational pull that's driving the standards, driving the models, driving the ways that we work, that can work, as we've said, with the federated teams to ensure that we do things in a similar way that can integrate and have interoperability between the business units. Because without those interoperabilities between the business units, that's when you get chaos.
I mean, I think, Lynn, you mentioned this earlier about bringing change management into the loop, right? And actually governing the change as well, not just the data elements by themselves, right? What's your sort of real-life implementation? I mean, have you seen this actually work out where these things have been brought together? Because we've been talking about this for years, right? Bringing data management and change management in lockstep.
So I sort of slightly disagree with Neil in terms of being the centre of the universe. I think it's hard to do data governance because it's not necessary to make your business work. Products will still be being built, processes will still happen, which is why it wasn't done for years. So really now it's coming because of the benefits of it. I think that's where we're having to go. Well, first it was risk, right? You're going to get fined on a regulation. And now we're looking at the benefits of it from an AI. And I think, yeah, you do need to have a central team. And I think you're absolutely right, Rebecca, in terms of if you don't have people doing it, it won't happen. And I think that's the same in projects. I think where I've seen the best success, whether it's federated or centralised, tech teams, change teams and data teams being lockstep is key. I was at one company, I won't say which, where the architecture teams and the data teams were just not in sync, nor was tech. We were all going in different directions, and it was really difficult to get everything done, and it was really political. I think where I've had success is where I am with the virtual line into data architectures, and we're talking to tech teams all the time. So they don't want to do anything without my say-so. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's like we get it into change governance where we've got checklists, and when they're about to create a new database or they're about to create something which could create technical debt, we've got such good relationships, they'll say, Lynn, can you just have a look at this? We want to make sure we've got the tags in place. We want to make sure the names are right. We want to make sure the access controls are right. So it's having those relationships with the change people that makes it happen, and then having the relationships with the tech teams that think twice before they do something that might embed huge amounts of technical debt. So I think that's a combination of having a checklist, having a process by which you can't go live until you've got my say-so is useful, but they also want to do it right the first time now, which has been really helpful.
Yeah, that's quite interesting because you've kind of summarized that exceptionally well, that you kind of bring these teams together, right? But it all starts with a sort of organizational shift, right? How do you bring these teams together? The cultural shift can come in, and I think, Rebecca, you made a point around this about the business value, right? But if you take the term business out of it, right, whether it's citizen value or business value, commercial value, effectively what you're trying to do is giving those teams something in return, right? It's like, governance is not just a policing function. If anything, it shouldn't be a policing function at all. And I think that's the shift that we are seeing, because quite frankly, in one of the organizations that we've seen this ourselves has been that we brought the governance flow into lockstep with the change management flow. And basically that says, if you haven't got your relevant stewards validate all the data elements and all the metadata is in place and all the checks have been done, your change doesn't get approved, right? So automatically, that then gets perceived as trying to slow change down. Now, how do you flip it on its back is by saying, well, do you know what, we made these things so easy for you, it adds no extra time to your day job, right? And that in return then incentivizes them to actually start doing this in the right way, and that kind of explains the partnership that you've seen with these teams, right? They are seeing something in there for themselves, right?
Yeah, we've got a really good use case at the moment where there was an issue with client reporting, and the way they'd built the process was they had made an active decision to take the data from non-trusted sources for good reasons, for totally good reasons, but it was properly governed, risk accepted. We said, this is an interim basis because you need to move on to strategic sources. And lo and behold, there was some really issues with using those sources, but we were able to sort of say, well, you signed that off, you risk accepted it, now you see the value of moving over to processes that are a bit more governed, controlled, we know the steps, and that data is trusted, so then you can use it and consume it in the right way.
Absolutely. A topic that's been going about for quite a bit, right, and this one's for Alex actually, because I wouldn't let... Yeah. So there is a lot of talk about, the first thing you hear is, let's just buy a governance tool, job's done, right? It doesn't stop with that. It hardly starts with that, actually. Tool before the process or the policies, I said policy, is not necessarily the right way. So, I mean, in your experience, how important or where in the overall sort of implementation of these policies does the tool play a role? Or do you even need one? Or is it just a spreadsheet? How would you sort of, what's your take on that?
Have we got any vendors in the room? All right, close your ears. So for us, we're not an HSBC. We don't have 10,000, 12,500 systems. We're not that kind of bag, right? We are an organization of 4,000 employees, so it's a very different kettle of fish. But this kind of follows on actually from what Lynn was saying just now. If you think about what you're creating when you've got data governance, you're creating a set of assets. You're creating a thing that your organization didn't have before, but now has. Let's say it's a glossary, a dictionary, set of risk acceptances, set of project documentation, something. Now, those have positive outcomes. Think about what Fiona was talking about earlier. Just because you have it doesn't necessarily mean it's an outcome for the bank in that case. And same for us. Let me give you an example. And I will get to the tooling. So You asked earlier about what is a data product. Yes, it's sources, uses, definitions on one axis, but down the other it's things like, well, is it an alpha, a beta, a production? What is it? What level of testing is it? So you've got a view of how good that thing is. But what it definitely isn't is a blank sheet of paper. And what we've discovered, and I'm starting to get there now, is that there is a cost to the blank sheet of paper. That's when people decide they've got a problem and they've been asked to solve a problem, and they start with a blank sheet of paper. They say, right, I'm going to build a project. I'm going to build a new warehouse. I'm going to build a new interface. I'm going to build this. I'm going to build that. Hang on a minute. Well, what are you doing? We've already got one of those. Why don't you reuse that? And why don't you reuse all of these CDEs that we've got listed out? Why don't we reuse that? Whether it's in a spreadsheet or a tool or whatever, use it. So an example recently, the FCA's PSD requirement, 280 fields or so of stuff that we should already have at our fingertips. And that we're obviously using to manage the business accordingly, right? Please, mild panic, where we're going to get this from what our business is, and what we're going to do. Well, stop what you're doing immediately. Do not stand up a project team with N amount of BAs to go searching and repeating the work that, conservatively, we've already done 5 times over the last 3 years. So we'll pull out the lineage we do have from a spreadsheet and actually force it into the project teams that you will start with this. So whether it's in a spreadsheet or not, it's the actual use of it that makes the difference. Now, I personally would love it if we actually could do things like the discovery of metadata from live databases. That would help immensely. Let's have a tool for that. Thank you very much. Let's have a repository which is in use and people are forced to use it inside the change team at minimum. And as Fiona was saying, be able to sort of use it as a way of subscribing intelligently to a bunch of models and data. That's your map to those services. So whether that's a spreadsheet, whether that's inherent in a glossary inside of Snowflake, wherever that exists, I don't care as long as it's being used. Now, that's my soapbox, and I'll die defending it.
No, but that, I want to unpick that a little bit, right? Because there's a lot in it, right? The most important point of all of this is, what are you trying to achieve, right? And we use this quite a bit when we speak to clients, prospects, or whoever, or even in the community, really, is data that's pushed into a database, warehouse, lake, whatever, right? And that's not being used is actually a liability, right? And the same applies to metadata, right? Same applies to the glossary. If no one's using it, it's obsolete, right? The time it was put up. And I think that's kind of the theme of it, right? If you don't ingrain it in the smallest possible way initially within the teams, it's not actually going to take off, right? And I think whether it's, I think also the analogy about, whether we need a tool or whether we need it in a bunch of spreadsheets, something homegrown or something that's bought, it's actually not the most important decision, right? It's what you do with it, right? I suppose.
I was just going to respond to that just quickly in terms of obsolete data. I haven't really come across that at the moment, right? Because actually, we're trying to build a marketplace. We're trying to build products. We haven't really got very many. People are coming along to the shop, and there's not much on the shelf. So what we're trying to do is say, how do we respond to that? Because we have to get something that is interesting enough that makes people want to come and shop. So we're trying to get all our data ingested. And to be honest, I don't care if it's used. It's just in the warehouse, ready to be used and put into a product. And we sort of have to guess because nobody's coming to us and saying, here's our use case, here's what we want to do. So we're in this really sort of hybrid situation between, we want to put things on our shelves and we don't really know what it is. So we might have to take a punt and put some obsolete data that is never going to be used there and just see. But then because we'll probably do an audit and say, how often was that table used? If at some point we realise it really isn't, we'll take it down. But that's how we're sort of going about it.
Absolutely. I mean, see, end of the day, where you start is important, right? And I think where you've got to with this, it's a very good, almost a counter view to it, right? To say, hang on, that's fine, but we've got nothing. So I'd rather have something instead of nothing, right? The reverse example of that, sadly, I've got scars from this, is that we've got a warehouse with tons of data being dumped, and obviously over a period of time, just nobody knew what it was, right? And at that point, you're thinking, hang on, can I use it? Can I not use it? Now, from an internal use case perspective, if it's not critical path, right, it makes sense, right? Now try exposing that to the client, and you're in a world of pain, right? So it's that risk appetite that goes with this data is quite critical. So that makes sense. But also another point that Fionn mentioned that reminded me that we didn't really dwell on this a lot, but it's the fact that, if you look at the platform that they built at Goldman, forgot the name, Alloy. I knew it. I had the other name. See, Alloy, right? The example that Fionn quoted there, right? That they had this 10 years in the making, and only recently they are starting to reap the benefits of the lineage aspects. Now, I'm sure the sort of core use cases it was being used for, but the sort of more complex aspects, right? Lineage is as easy as it may be to explain. It's hard to use, right? And very hard to implement, right? And the fact that it's taken that many years. Now, what I'm not saying is you spawn 10-year programs to do this, right? What I'm saying is that it takes time to embed into the organization. And that's kind of the important point, really. Rebecca, I mean, what are you saying in terms of sort of spoiled for choice? So in terms of tool adoption, are you seeing that sort of play an important role into it?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what's being said, and if you've already got things in place, even though they might be in a bit of an organic format and, they are in spreadsheets still, use that first rather than trying to reinvent the wheel and try and make the most of what you already have. It also depends on the size of your organization, I think. And for me, there's a key element of automizing. So, when you look at ownership, for example, or data quality rules, I would like to put the years of spreadsheets behind me with that. And that level of automation, I think, we're looking at rolling out AI solutions. You can't have a plan to roll out, in my opinion, an AI solution that's going to make your work more efficient and optimize it, but you've got a very manual process in order to assess and deploy that tool. So I think there is benefit in having tools, data governance tools that automates a lot of that for you. And it's a good, what we're finding as well is it's a good way to start getting those use cases to come to you, because you can also justify the value of their work. So not just, as you were saying before, not just the business value of the data, but the value of the day-to-day tasks that's being done in a more efficient, less tedious, less manual way. So that's my experience, what I'm finding with tools.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite good, because if you look at it this way, right, ultimately what are we saying? That the tool has to be an enabler to accelerate what you're trying to do. What you can't be hung up on is that I can only do what this tool does, right? So you got to start with what you want to achieve and then work your way back. And I quite like the concept that use the right tool for the job, and that doesn't necessarily always mean one tool that does it all, right? So I think even if you have a bit of proliferation of one or two tools specialized in doing a few of these things, that's okay, right? Because that one ring to rule them all concept got us where we are now, really, isn't it? That rings aloud. So Neil, I mean, what are you seeing in this sort of public services?
So I just wanted to bring you back to the conversation we had before about sort of waiting for use cases. And I think if we're always waiting for the use case to build our data, and I totally agree with colleagues about, let's not just hold the data that we need for now. If we're just waiting for that use case, we never innovate. And some of the big step change innovations that I've seen in my career in the public sector is the data teams have had these conceptual ideas about the art of the possible. They've built something in the face of opposition from saying, why are you doing this? We won't need it, we won't use it. And now everybody's shouting about what we've built, saying we couldn't live without it type thing. And one of the main ones that we're shouting about at the moment is during COVID, and we've developed it since. I started bringing from every school, every state-funded school in England, I started bringing the attendance registers in overnight, every day. So every night we bring morning and afternoon attendance registers, and we feed back 20,000 bespoke dashboards to the schools that can manage attendance. It's a massive problem. Attendance hasn't picked up after COVID as well. When we started doing that, people were saying, but we used to do it once a term, that's always been good enough. And now we can't live without having this real information. So during COVID, I was having evening meetings with my Secretary of State, and no one asked me to do this, but we did it. And then the first thing on the agenda was how many children were in school today, this morning, and how do you actually manage that? So you need the data teams to imagine, to conceptualize, to innovate, and not wait for the use case, because by then it'll be too late.
100%. I mean, this is a very similar sort of ground-up innovation view on things, right? Is that the challenge you obviously faced with is there's only so far you can get off with the sort of skunkworks view on this, right? And at some point, you got to make this available to the decision makers to say, now can we take this up a notch? But you got to prove value in the smallest possible way and build on it, right? So now this is great, right? We've really enjoyed this. I want to open the floor up for some questions if there is any. Here with the mic, come on. Otherwise I'm going to go through my 300, yeah?
Okay, just one from my experience. I've spent a long time in a very large American bank. And listening to you, you're all talking about kind of struggling with organizations that don't take data very seriously, and kind of, like Goldman Sachs, 10 years ago, my old employer was in the same space. So there's a journey of adoption. But my question, one of the things I saw in that journey was in the early days, kind of data governance evangelists who were like fundamentalists. The business were just like, you're freaks, go away, stay in your room, we don't want to talk to you, you're annoying us. And just from your point of view, as experts, how important is it to be able to speak in the language of the business?
I've got the mic, so I'll start. I mean, it's critical, absolutely critical, because you don't want to, if you want to help your organisation reap the value of good data, well-managed, well-governed data, you have to talk in terms of business outcomes and outputs as well. No one wants to go in and start talking nerdy terms, because no one, as you say, you just switch it off. So I really drive home to my teams, can we talk in human, please? Because people understand human, they don't understand tech talk, and I think it's absolutely essential.
I was going to say, I spent years trying to talk to people that didn't want to be spoken to about it, and actually, I don't talk to them anymore. It's such a huge drain of effort. And now I try and focus on the people that do want to talk about data, and the data geeks, and the people that want to access the data, because you're adding more value to them. I think the people that are not on the journey yet, they will come, but I'm going to focus the majority of my attention on the people that, do understand a little bit more about the data terms and care a bit more about it.
I'll make just a quick point.
Yeah,
Sorry, Rebecca, please.
Go ahead.
So, everyone familiar with the 1999 film, Edward Norton, Brad Pitt, Fight Club? Right. What's the first rule of Fight Club? Right. So whenever I talk upwards in the organisation, I don't say data governance because if you start saying things like data governance, then they have existential problems about what it is and why and all this kind of stuff. You just talk about the thing itself.
And value, absolutely.
Sorry, Rebecca.
No, that's fine. I would say, it's stakeholder engagement is a huge piece. It's almost like you need a public relations person in data governance to just befriend people and take them out for drinks, and then be like, hey, right? Because in the end, I think that perception's changed a bit, but they are your customers, right? At the end of the day, and there is that kind of relationship side of it, and not scaring them off with the first word of governance and management and all this kind of stuff. I was very briefly, for good reasons, a teacher for 6 months it lasted, and then I realized I could work remotely in data governance, and that went out the window. And I think doing it with the heart of a teacher a little bit, it's the translating your technical terms and your jargon and what you think is important to their mindset, to their language, to what they really understand. And every department and every industry is different in that aspect. They've got different priorities, and they understand things in different ways, and they see data in different ways. So I think that's key. Know your audience and take them out for a few drinks.
I think the underlying theme of all this is empathy, right? And I think if you are talking upwards in the organization, you also have to appreciate the fact that they are not in the weeds with us every day, right? They really don't kind of get it. It needs translation. I think, Lynn, you brought up an interesting point there, right? And just want to talk about that. It's the classic adoption curve, right? Isn't it? You focus on the early adopters, the early majority, and then the late majority, and the laggards you leave alone, right? What tends to typically happen is that we try to quieten that one voice in the room who's making a lot of noise. I would strongly recommend take them out of the room because that helps, right? Then you can focus on the individuals that are actually trying to make a difference, right? So.
What's your next question? Oh.
Thank you. I was really interested to hear what Lynn said about take a punt on the data you're going to ingest. And also, I loved Neil's story about the school attendance data and not knowing that you needed it until we went into a pandemic. And actually, you talked about innovation. But is it not just partly insight? Because actually, I used to work for a football club, and I always used to think there's lots and lots of different departments that look after footballers, nutritionists, psychologists, performance. And if you had a data lake with all that information in, you might actually realise that if you fed Bukayo Saka carrots, he might score more goals.
Can I? Actually, Lynn sings that.
No, I'll pass it straight back. But I mean, I'm cutting my teeth from years of data warehousing where, you know, you'd bring data in and stage it. And I think these principles still apply. You might not need to put it in the shop front. You might not. But guarantee the one person that says, I really want that, if you haven't got it ready and available, your kudos has gone right down. You're like, oh, really wish I could have serviced that requirement, but I now need to go back to my engineering team and go and get it. I mean, as I say, with Snowflake Data Share, it's all there anyway, and then you've got it to use. But yeah, I that's one of the things I've learned early on is just try and have the data available, even if you just keep it ready, cold storage type way.
Can I build on that just to say that totally agree, and making of stuff available is great. So before we started, we had a quick chat, and one of the frustrations I have is that what you're talking about is an alpha. It's a hypothesis. I think that. And maybe with AI, it'll be did you know that? But let's start with, I think that. You start off with a hypothesis, and you have an alpha, you run a query, and because it's across all of that data, you've got your initial answer. Beta, tested, and then production, right? Something that is actually supported. At the moment in our organization, depending on who you ask and what access they have to little pockets of data, sometimes we've productionized an alpha. In other words, that was just a question that should have been answered on a Thursday afternoon. It should not be an MI report that we still support 7 years later, one of 400 in just one of our businesses, right? So what a waste of money. Actually, it should have been just alpha, but they didn't do that because that person sat in the BI team and they have to deliver everything tested. What the problem is not just the availability, but the availability of the right people to do the right kind of data lab activities at the right time. And if we got those two things together, then I think you get the dimensions right.
Yeah, I mean, what you're really talking about is bringing that sort of product mindset to data, isn't it, really? And hence the sort of focus in the industry at the moment around data products, right? And it gets very tech-heavy, right? It's people start talking about we need SLAs and we need to talk about specific contracts and how we interact with it. That's great, but how about we peel it back a little and just, what are we trying to do with this data? Are we going to commercialize it? Is this for external use, internal use? Start building with the first use case, internal maybe, test it out, and then build on top of it, right? So that makes sense.
And do some quick fire questions, if that's all right, and get as many in as possible. I think we have one here.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the panelists. I think you guys are heroes and heroines of guarding the data because there's so much data today coming in. It's like data economy, isn't it? Then my question is to make the complex data more usable, reusable. What do you think is the best approach to treat data as a product? And how much demand do you have in your organization to treat that as a product? And what do you think is the best way to approach it?
Thanks very much, guys. So I think the most important thing for that one is around all the metadata. So for data to be a product, people need to understand what it's telling you and what it needs to do. And if you don't have that, it's not a product. It's just a spaghetti mess of stuff. And so the most important thing is when you're building your databases or your data systems or your data products or whatever you want to call them, make sure that you explain what it is, what the lineage is, what it actually means. You know, what does a start mean? I remember getting into a big row with some policy people in the Department for Work and Pensions when the digital team told the minister that there were 1 million people on universal credit, and I had to go to the minister and say, well, actually, no, there's only 500,000 people on universal credit. They have misinterpreted what a been on the benefit means, and they said they'd actually started the application process, and I said they'd actually received first payment. I said we could get more people on universal credit on the other definition just by mandating the whole civil service and the army to apply for it. None of them will get it, or very few of them will get it, but it's about being really, really precise in your terminology so that when people come in to use it, they know, they don't have to ask the questions, they know what is the data and what it means.
So I was going to say, I mean, obviously we are overrunning, right? But just to close this out a little bit, we've had a cracking discussion about data governance, right? If you had to leave the practitioners in the room with one piece of advice, what would that be, each of you, really?
Bringing people that can talk human to the business.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. And I would also say try and leverage existing things that you already have in your organisation. Try and just use what's there and make that work, like change frameworks, risk frameworks, as well as trying to build your own ground-up frameworks and things.
Recognise the cost to your organisation of the blank sheet of paper. Use the product of data governance for the cost benefit.
All of the above.
With that,
Sonia and I always battle for the mic. I just wanted to do a quick thank you to our panelists. I'm going to do a quick British Airways on you. We know you have a lot of options probably for these talks, and thanks for choosing us and spending your evening with us. I thought it was applicable. Sunny, thanks for hosting. If you can't get enough of Sunny, I have good news. He has his own podcast. It's called The Sunny Side of Tech, and it's available on all of your popular podcast channels. I believe, so we're moving upstairs now to the wild side, where we're gonna have refreshments and some nibbles. You get there by going right out of the room up to the 12th floor with the lift, and we will guide you along the way so you don't get lost. Please bring your coats and bags should you have left them in the cloakroom. And just to leave you with thanks a lot for coming. Thanks for spending the evening with us. I believe our panelists and Fionn are going to spend a bit more time with us. So for the ones that couldn't get their questions answered, everybody will be around and available to chat. And our next tech series is on the 26th of June. There'll be a lot of details on that in our follow-up. It'd be great to see as many of you again as possible. Again, thanks for coming, and we'll see you upstairs.